we enjoy today? What if free people could live secure in the knowledge that their security did not rest upon the threat of instant U.S. retaliation to deter a Soviet attack, that we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our own soil or that of our allies? I know this is a formidable technical task, one that may not be accomplished.
Victor Technologies, the high-flying hardware computer company which took a nosedive this year, may be bought out by the British firm Applied Computer Technologies.
Piloting the space shuttle is very difficult to do. One would think, can a kid or a normal person actually pull this off?
Well, what I did when I designed this was I understood that problem.
It seems the sweep of technology has no limits. In San Francisco this week, the world's first robot bartender was unveiled. The robot can talk, can take spoken orders, and can mix 200 different drinks. But on the first test run, the robot knocked a glass off the bar and onto the floor and poured beer all over the counter. The robot's designer said there were still some bugs to be worked out.
U.S. retaliation, nuclear war, nuclear war.
In Japan, where high technology is showcased, consumers stare in wonder at the latest facet of life overtaken by the computer age, the department store. But while the Cebu store is proud of its technology, it is worried that customers will feel it has lost the human touch.
Let me share with you a vision of the future which offers hope. It is that we embark on a program to counter the awesome Soviet missile threat with measures that are defensive. Let us turn to the very strengths in technology that spawned our great industrial base and that have given us the quality of life we enjoy today. What if free people could live secure in the knowledge that their security did not rest upon the threat of instant U.S. retaliation to deter a Soviet attack, that we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our own soil or that of our allies? I know this is a formidable technical task, one that may not be accomplished.
Victor Technologies, the high-flying hardware computer company which took a nosedive this year, may be bought out by the British.
Georgie Dinkov, how are you?
I'm fine. How is everybody else?
Our first stream of 2021. Guys, please let us know how the audio is. I changed some things around. It should be slightly louder, but I hope we're not clipping it all. Please let us know below. Okay, so you are in DC. What is your impression of what went down? Because you're straight at the source.
I don't know exactly what went down at Congress. I wouldn't call it a riot or definitely not an insurrection. I mean, I'm sure some of the crowd was probably like truly Trump supporters, but the main actors, I think at this point has been confirmed that they're either paid actors, right? Like the guy with the Viking hat, right? Mm-hmm. Or like potential intelligence assets or other government operatives. But the thing that kind of like, not that it concerns me, I guess it's kind of hopeful, is that regular people on the street now have this like look on their faces like, oh my God, I just can't believe this is happening. Like what is going on? Like, I thought that everything's fine. There's just a bunch of wackos. It's like when somebody is being lied to for a very long time, and then suddenly they're presented with a situation that they can't deny is happening. It's almost like you see like part of them die effectively.
Well, did Trump actually incite the situation? Because I couldn't figure out what like.
I don't think so, but Giuliani did say, let's have a trial by combat. And now they're saying like, well, that's definitely, you incited the crowd, right? Mm-hmm. And whether that's true or not, if you're going to go like pick between the two, Giuliani had more things to say that probably could be interpreted as incendiary and calling for a riot than Trump. But I don't think Trump ever said like, let's march on the Capitol.
But all his critics were saying that he incited it. So I was trying to look for the clip of what clip they thought he was doing the inciting, and I couldn't find anything.
The speech basically like that he gave while Congress was meeting to certify the electoral votes.
Saying the election was stolen or something.
Yeah, something like that. But I never heard. I mean, I listened to the speech. I never heard of him saying anything that. I guess here's the thing. In a court of law, it all comes down to arguments. Like you can say one thing, and then some lawyer will be like, "Yes, Your Honor, but if you look at this precedent from like 40 years ago, the exact same words, such and such happened," and that's what it comes down to. Like it's just an argument, and whether the judges will buy or not. So that's the problem. It's like manufacturing reality or defining what things are. Who was that guy? Was it like Jerry Rubin, the guy from he was like a civil rights movement actors from the 60s who said the power to define terms and reality is the ultimate power, right? So I'm sure in the rights of mainstream media and all of their PSYOP handlers, they can take that speech and find a million things inside that they will say like, well, this means he's calling for a riot. He's not really saying it, but like that's what this means. And unfortunately, the public will gobble it up. At least in DC, 92%. I mean, even if the election was stolen, I think 92% voting for Biden is pretty indicative of where this is leaning, which direction.
Yeah, like no matter what. First, when I was I wasn't following it very closely, but when I was watching videos, it seemed like really tame. Like they went into the Capitol. Again, we're not partisan on this show. I don't care about conservative or liberal or whatever. But it seemed not like it wasn't burning a city down. You know what I mean? It was.
Did you see the cops opening the gates and inviting the protest? It's already on Reddit, and now Reddit is starting to chase its tail. Like on one hand, they want to say that this was like an insurrection, right? And on the other hand, they'll be like, well, if the cops are inviting them in, like. Why wouldn't these people go in? Maybe they just wanted to stage a protest, and the cops are saying, "Hey, yeah, of course, come on in. We're gonna open the gates for you."
Can you see this, by the way?
Which one?
See the
nerve of MAGA Viking.
The nerve of MAGA Viking to take selfies in Congress. Doesn't he know that this is the sacred place of insider trading and self-dealing? But I have seen several takes that were like, "How dare they go into the Capitol? It's like such a sacred place," and I'm like. Are you kidding me? And then
they bombed the Pentagon, man. I mean, it's like
here we go.
And people died, right?
Well, here we go. Those politicians that send our children to fight and die in foreign wars, they hit the floor and cower when unarmed protesters enter the building. So again, I'm sure there's this take we have right now is not. I'm sure people have heard it 100,000 times. But if there was a problem, reaction, solution, clearly it was to tighten down on censorship or something, right?
Well, I mean, it's already happening, and now, like, I'm actually concerned, and I hope this is not going to be misconstrued by the censorship algorithms as somehow like threatening the president-elect or something. I'm concerned something might happen during the inauguration, because I really don't think that even if Biden gets sworn in as a president, I think the man is demented quite clearly, and even as a acting president, he will probably be, spending most of the day asleep and or sedated. And then other people be making decisions for him, which is not entirely novel in this country, considering that G.W. Bush was probably the same way. Cheney was running things behind the scenes. But this will be like Mrs. President Kamala Harris pulling the strings. And if, God forbid, something happens to the president-elect, that's exactly what they need to basically like do another 9/11, right? And say, what more do you need than something happening to the president? And even if it's of natural causes, they'll find a way. Did you see like that policeman who got like injured? And they're saying he got injured, but he went home and he died 2 days later. And now they're saying they're opening a federal murder investigation. But if you look at the local news, the guy died of heart attack, right? So they're saying now they're going to charge people with murder because they stressed that person to death, and that police person went home and died 2 days later. So I wouldn't say it's out of the question that if something were to happen to the president-elect, it will be taken and saying like, well, it's because of all of these events, and now we're gonna like yes, he died of natural causes, or like something happened to him of natural causes, but considering the situation, there are culpable parties here, and we're going to use this event to remove whatever little freedom you have left.
Yeah, and I think a white Trump terrorism is clearly going to be a big story in 2021. This is from Whitney, and she says, this is before Congress. Alyssa worked at the CIA and the Pentagon and helped destabilize the Middle East during the Bush and Obama admins. What she says here is essentially an open announcement that the U.S. has moved from the war on foreign terror to the war on domestic terror. Again, it's just a tragedy that like people that lived through 9/11 take this seriously. Like, wouldn't most people you talk to, even if like liberal or conservative, acknowledge that the war on terror was mostly a complete farce, And but again, the same ideas are being used for coronavirus and now this impending domestic war on terror.
Did you see that study? They basically like reached out to people that were interviewed on 9/11 or shortly after. I'm sorry, it was about the Iraq War. Mm-hmm. So they kept the recordings of interviews of, I think it was like 100 people, and they basically now went back to them and asked them about the Iraq War. And like out of the 120 or some people, all of them at the time said, yes, we need to go into Iraq and like get rid of Saddam Hussein because this is part of the war on terror. Mm-hmm. Now when they asked them, every single one of them said, no, I was against the war in Iraq. and like I actually defended, I said that this Bush is a criminal. We never need to go into Iraq. And so it's like, how do you expect people not to lie to others if they're willing to lie to themselves? And it's like, call it misremembering, call it like cognitive dissonance, right? They're trying to like keep their mental health. But it's like, if that is the case, you can't expect much from the average citizen on the street. They'll just do whatever needs to be done at the moment. And then, they will use, unfortunately, very manipulated news sources to form an opinion. And to go back to what Whitney Webb said, I was watching that video with her on The Last American Vagabond, right? Mm-hmm. And like at the end, just like I told you before we started recording, just like Catherine Fitz, right? She said, well, we need to stop participating in the system. We need to start organizing at a hyper-local level, right? And I'm thinking, I think this sounds great, but you don't think this has been tried before? This may have worked in the 60s. These people now are little by little. Look at what happened to the Black Panther Party. It was immediately infiltrated, right? So I know Ray has been saying like the only chance is if sufficient number of people organize at the local level so that they can go and like compromise everybody. Yeah, but that's like that is the hardest problem in any society. How do you get a sufficiently large number of people to simultaneously get off their butts and start doing something, right? If you have a solution to that, then the empire is done. But I don't see that, and in fact, half of the population is now not only unwilling to take part in taking down the empire, they're actively hunting you down simply for having an independent opinion.
Yeah, I heard a heartening story from a couple, I think it was in Idaho or Ohio, but they said their whole congregation in their church, like their pastor speaks about how the immunity problem is not real. I'm trying to avoid the algorithm here, but yeah. But they said that their whole congregation was on the same page, and I was like, that's totally amazing, because I can't think of anything like that. And that actually kind of speaks to why the CIA and intelligence has been so anti trying to disperse the church and stuff. Because I interviewed a guy named Jay Dyer, and he's talked about how the CIA has been messing with churches and congregations like that for a long time. And so it kind of makes sense because that is one last bastion of like communitarianism, and they'd have to get rid of that. Yeah.
They have to get rid of that. And, and it's basically, what was I going to say? Damn. Just slip off my mind. But yeah, I love the work of both Miss Fitz and Miss Webb. I think they're doing great work. But I have a feeling, based on past experience living in a totalitarian country, that things like, we're just going to have to organize, amongst ourselves. And, once we have enough people, we're going to topple the empire. The empire is not going to let you do that. They're actually, the little freedom that we had was based on being self-sufficient, right? Growing your own food, like having a small business and things like that. And that's what this whole, I don't want to call, again, the immunity problem, the immunity theater. That's what this whole immunity theater, it targets, right? It's just 60% of small businesses that are closed already are gone for good. Now, that doesn't mean that they cannot somehow resurrect themselves in a different shape or form. Just because like a restaurant has shut down doesn't mean that like the owner and the family are screwed. They may be willing or able to start a new business after things reopen and things are, the restrictions are lifted. But just today there was an article on Russia Today, which many people consider fake news. It said that, it was a speech by Boris Johnson, who said that this latest lockdown, he actually didn't give a timeline for when it would end. And when they asked him, they pressed him, the journalist kept asking, like, so what's going on? You've been giving us a kind of like a tentative date, the 3 prior lockdowns, and now you're just saying, like, we're not going to reopen? And he just said, we will see how it goes.
Yeah. I know we've said this before, but those clearly have to be the main goal has to be to make people insane. Like I think I posted. Yeah. I'm not the person.
Well, turn people on each other. Yeah. Have you seen that quote from Ray saying that lockdowns are really bad because they make people turn on each other, and that by itself actually leads to social isolation. And the other part, which is really bad, is also that normally, like in a normal functioning society, the professional psychiatrist almost doesn't exist. There's no need for it. You channel trauma. I think that's what Ray said. You dissolve trauma through others. So you go to your friends, you go to your family, and if most of them are healthy, you go to 5-6 people and you kind of voice your concerns, and that's your therapy, right? And in fact, it's better than therapy because these people care about you, right? Unlike the psychiatrist who is sitting there scribbling God knows what, like, this person is deranged, very heavy drugs necessary here, right? I'm sure they're doing something like that, or at the very least, the psychiatrist is looking for a way to put you on some kind of a psychotropic drug, because that's how the psychiatrist makes money. Through the sessions as well, but they definitely want you on some kind of a drug, because it makes you a patient for life. So anyway, so basically the purpose, I think, of the lockdowns is precisely this: to turn as much as possible people on each other. And if that happens, then the state doesn't have to expend all of these resources to track all the descent down. Like your neighbors and relatives will be doing that for them, right? And something similar to this was attempted in the former communist countries like Bulgaria and Soviet Union. But actually, people very quickly caught on that this is lethal to the community and themselves as well, and actually started feeding the secret police like, BS leads. Oh yeah, this person is like talking about like toppling the great communist party, and then of course the police go and try to arrest the guy, and he turns out to be like a KGB agent or something like that. And actually, there's a book that a few top KGB agents got taken out by mistake by KGB because KGB thought these are spies because they got ratted out by regular folks on the street, and KGB went in full force into their hidden quarters, which they thought was basically like a safe house for a resistance movement, and immediately gunned them down. So back in the day, like the secret police, it lasted for a very short time. It was like, I think, in the early 70s. But several very high-profile KGB agents, like brains behind operations of molesting and harassing people and like tormenting them, got gunned down by their own men because they got swatted. But I guess the term would be like KGB added or something.
Well, you make
somebody called the KGB and said, "Oh, over there is like a capitalist, like they're having a secret meeting trying to topple the system." KGB immediately went in because they shoot first, and the saying, "Shoot first, ask questions later." They don't ask questions; they just shoot, right? So they immediately gun down everybody, and turn out they killed a few of their very top people.
Well, you make a very good point. Like I've heard that like the newborn, the parents act as like an extension of its stress system, but I never really thought about that in relation to adults, but that quote that Ray said, that's really true. Like we disperse our stress or mitigate our stress by talking to other people, and an isolated society just means that will cause even more harm just being alone. But that's been happening for a long time if you've been an outsider or if you've been swimming upstream, but now it's even more so.
Yeah, I kind of sensed it since like around 9/11. I mean, I was here in the late 90s. I came in 97. And for about 3 years, America looked like heaven on earth. Little did I know, right? But it's still like people weren't angry, weren't suspicious. It was a different kind of America. And then as soon as I saw those planes or whatever it was that hit the towers, like something in those Americans on the street changed. Like these people basically like turn into, like, I don't know, if they were a poodle before, they turned into Dobermans. And it was like really, they started getting suspicious of immigrants. Even in DC, which is an extremely liberal city, you could tell you could sense there was a change in attitude. And I think there was it like what's his name? Tenet, George Tenet, the former CIA director. He said like basically like 9/11 was when America stopped being innocent. And I'm like, well, that's another way of saying like you turn everybody into psychopaths, right? And that's pretty much it, right? I mean, and the thing is like, so I don't know if you remember that study we discussed in one of the podcasts, that the placebo effect is actually real, and it depends. It only happens. They found out that it doesn't happen all the time. So if the doctor gives you a placebo pill and says this will help you, right? They actually found out that it only works if the doctor genuinely cares about you and you're able to sense it. And as a result of this, there is a surge in dopamine, which of course means serotonin is suppressed, and you break out of the learned helplessness. The placebo effect doesn't work all the time. And it's been one of the greatest mysteries in medicine. Is like, why does it work in 30% of the people, but not in the others? And one study says that it depends on the person in front of you, whether your caregiver cares about you. So in the absence of the caregiver, those caregivers in a normal society are your friends and your relatives, right? So when you go and you vent to your friends and relatives, a caring person will actually listen to you. Do you know that now the advice of every single therapist is to avoid negative people? Basically, like if somebody comes to you and tries to vent, the advice from every single therapist is to immediately cut them off, immediately. And it doesn't matter how close of a relative or a friend they are. It's like you need to isolate yourself. And I'm like, okay, if this was like one or two negative people in your life, okay, maybe I don't agree with it, but I can see some argument for limiting interaction with them, right? But you still have to, like, these people don't disappear, right? So I don't even agree with that, but I can see an argument for it. But if everybody around you is like that, what are you going to do? Isolate from everybody? How is this healthy? And the response is, well, we're going to give you drugs.
Yeah, no. Some of my friends just had children, and I'm like, oh my god, like I feel for it. Like having a family through all this would be an extra layer of stress, just because it's. So let's address the black pilled thing. So my understanding of black pilled is kind of. I don't know the formal definition, but
red pill on steroids.
Yeah, I think it's the idea that you can't do anything, or maybe you're doomed, or like things are so bad. But maybe I'm using the term wrong. But we're talking and Ray's talking, and it seems like things are going to get worse before they're going to get better. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. It just doesn't seem like there's going to be some magical uprising and stop everything that's going on. But I could be completely wrong.
I mean, as we discussed just before we started recording, so it's like everybody seems to be saying like, oh, if only enough people, realized the situation and rose up together, keyword here, together, and a large number of people, right? Well, of course, if you can do that, then no empire will ever form. I mean, if a sufficient number of people realize how things are and together somehow simultaneously rose up, yeah, of course, no empire can handle that, right? But now they're getting closer with technology. And I think that's one of the reasons for the push behind robotics and AI. The idea that little by little, basically, like policing will probably be replaced somehow by robots and AI, and these machines will probably be given license to kill on spot. And then they're going to worry about the courts later, because as we already know, most of the courts, they're going to side with the police, as they have been doing for the last 100+ years.
Okay, so we have a black pill is nihilism. So that's not what we're doing.
I like my version. I think it's a pessimist and pessimism and hopelessness are not the same thing. And I don't even know why I should be calling it pessimism. I mean, like, do you think we're imagining these things? Like, has your life gotten better over the last 10 years, as outside of finding Ray? Like, do you think like you have more opportunities than your parents did? I don't think so. And I haven't met a single person who said my life is better than my parents. Only one person, and he inherited a trust fund. And when his parents died, he's a very rich person from New York City. When his parents died, he got even more money. So in a sense, that's how this person's materialistically, his life got better. Every single other person that I talk to, they're saying no. I mean, first of all, I'll probably never have a house. Chances are I will not have children, and chances are I'll actually not even have a partner. Throughout life. There's this joke in female counseling sessions saying like the difference between a girl's mother and grandmother and her. The grandmother had like a farm, 6 kids, and a single husband. Her mom had like 2 kids, no farm, a husband, and 4 lovers. And the current generation, the girl, she has no lovers, no farm, no kids, a cat, and 2 abortions.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, we're in the small way that we can. We're talking about it. We're being, open. We're not. I know a lot of health people. In this, they won't talk about this stuff. Even if I know for a fact some of them secretly are skeptical. And I know it's like career suicide kind of because again, we'll probably get taken off YouTube at some point. but I'm saying we're trying to do as much as we possibly can with our very small audience and things like that. So, I don't think that classifies as nihilism.
So, I mean, I think the technology and the advancement of technology over the last 20 years, let's say with the internet, right? It has both good and bad sides, right? The good sides is that a lot more information spreads much more rapidly, right? And at the same time, it can be censored much more rapidly. And so I think the good news is that, look at this, like half of the country thinks that something is so off, right, that they're willing to stage protests and, I guess, storm Congress if it even happened by, outside of the false flag events and the paid actors that were there. I mean, it's fair to say, I think there was a huge crowd in DC, and there still is, and I don't think all of them are paid actors. They seem to be generally supporting the current president, and they're very angry at what is being going on, and they seem generally convinced that there was a massive election fraud. So it's like that seems to be about half of the country. And I think the other good news is that if you look at the past elections over the last 20 years, it has always been like that. No single president that got elected got more than what, 55% of the vote at most, right? It's always been 52-48. It was 50-50 in like 2000 when it was Gore running against Bush, right? And then like basically like I think Obama got like close to 60% when he was running against Romney. No, I'm sorry. When he was running against McCain, that was like so his first term, and then after like when he was competing against Romney, like that difference, that gap was very small, like maybe 5%, if not less. And now we're getting the exact same thing, basically. Like, well, I guess some of Trump supporters will say he had a landslide the first term, right, when he was running against Hillary. Mm-hmm. So maybe we did have like an election where a president got more than 60% of the votes. But in general, seems that the country is polarized. It has been polarized for 20 years. Nothing has improved drastically for the last 20 years. In fact, things seem to be getting worse because now we're having people that are willing to storm Congress, right? And basically now we have like unemployment that has not been seen in the last 50 years. We have small businesses collapsing and all these things. So it's hard to gaslight people and tell them, everything's fine. Half of the country does not buy that. Won't. It doesn't buy that because, I mean, you can't sit there and say, everything's fine when your restaurant just shut down for good. Or your farm just shut down for good. Or you just got furloughed. Actually, you got furloughed while the company was getting federal help, your employer. They really were planning to fire you from the very beginning, right? Mm-hmm. But they couldn't. But they waited a few months, and now that all of these like restrictions on firing people are gone, they're kicking you on the street. And the only thing that I think that's preventing a bigger commotion is the fact that there is still a moratorium on evictions. If that ends, and I think now it's at the state level, if that ends, or when that ends, I think we're going to start seeing like a much bigger backlash because what was that president who said that economic reality trumps everything else? Mm-hmm. If you have a sufficient number of people that are on the street, poor, no health insurance, not that they need it because the doctors will kill you more reliably than the disease, right? But what I'm saying is that if the basic necessities for life are missing, I think that's when we're going to start seeing. What I'm trying to say is there's already an awakening for at least half of the country, but I don't think we're seeing yet mass concerted, coordinated action. Once the proverbial crap hits the fan, I think that's when actually people will rise up almost as one because they already know the truth. Just like Snowden said, people know the truth, but they're powerless. So and I don't think they will become powerful over the next several months. I think they'll just become desperate enough so that remaining peaceful or obedient, because that's not peaceful, that's obedience, will not be an option anymore.
I'm hesitant to say, if we could go over it quickly, I wanted to ask Ray what happened in 2020, but I want to ask you, obviously this white terrorism and censorship being clamped down, but what do you expect to happen over 2021? What's your forecast in as a few paragraphs as possible? Then we can move on.
My forecast is that basically now that they've convinced, now that the powers that be have realized that the population doesn't buy the terror meme anymore. Mm-hmm. I think there's some truth that they will try to shift the conversation towards domestic terrorism. Mm-hmm. But I think like this only works if people are rich but scared, right? Mm-hmm. It was kind of like in 2000 and 2001, this argument worked because most people were relatively well off, right? And if you tell them, some evil terrorists are going to come and bomb the shit out of you, mm-hmm. and life as you know it will end. Mm-hmm. People were willing to support politicians that were obviously lying, and people even back then knew. But there was something that these people had to lose. I don't think the situation will work that well right now, the same argument. So, and I think the powers that be know that very well. That's why I mentioned the Boris Johnson and the indefinite lockdowns. So I think this will continue until they basically have destroyed enough of the source of income for most people that then if they lift the restrictions, most people will basically at the point of rioting. And at that point, the government may show up as the great savior of everybody and say, listen, here is $2,000 a month, right? If you don't riot. If you riot, then we don't have that money, right? We cannot. So if you want peace, there has to be obedience. If you want money, there has to be some sort of obedience, even if you know we're murderers and liars and cheaters and whatnot, because otherwise we have no incentive to give you any money. And I think the real question is, what portion of the population will swallow that bitter pill and agree to that deal? Because that deal is going to start as a very benign deal, as in like, here's some money so you can survive. But once you go down that road, once you become conditioned to not take care of yourself, to not work and entirely depend on the government, we're already seeing these large-scale projects in countries like France. If you go to southern France, there are places basically where there have been generations of immigrants from northern Africa that went to France, especially southern France, like Marseille, and they basically are incapable of not incapable, I shouldn't say capable, but like it's a cultural thing now to basically be on welfare for your entire life and do absolutely nothing, because your parents were on welfare, your grandparents were on welfare, and life seems to be okay. It's not great,
but you'll be happy, according to the world.
Exactly. And you will own nothing and be happy. That's what Klaus Schwab said, right? Yeah. Well, we already have that experiment in several European countries, and it's not going well. Like what I was trying to say is that it's not safe to be in southern France right now. There are places in Sweden and Germany where it's not safe to be. You'll get attacked. So it shows that when you remove the sense of purpose from people's lives, even if you give them money, that doesn't really lead to anything. Let's see what percentage of the U.S. population or the developed world population will buy that story and agree to be a slave, because that's really what it's all about. Once they start you on the universal basic income, some people have said, "Oh, we've had UBI since the 60s. It's called welfare." It's not. There were very few requirements, at least in the current version, for welfare, right? I mean, I think there's actually I don't even think there's a requirement for you to work. If you're socially disadvantaged, and I don't know by what formula that gets determined, you just get the housing and the allowance and whatnot. And I don't think there are any requirements that you ever move out of there. That's how we have the projects in the U.S. and not only in the U.S., right? So the difference with the UBI will be that even right now what they're pushing it, they're saying that it already comes with very heavy strings attached. Namely, you have to get vaccinated. No vaccine, no UBI, right? And then you want to buy food, you have to get vaccinated, right? So let's see what kind of because if the majority of the population doesn't buy the UBI idea, then there are only two options. Either there will be a mass riot of all of these hungry people, or the empire will realize that it cannot control them all, and at which point I guess the empire will collapse. Or the empire will say, okay, they didn't buy our story, we better pull out the guns and basically get rid of all of these that are not buying our story. And then the rest will follow, whether out of fear or because of coming to their senses, if you want to call it that way. So that's what my projection is, that the pressure will continue until they've destroyed most of the sources of income for the middle and the low class, if there's even middle class at this point. I think most of it has been decimated, and at that point they will try to roll out the UBI, in other words, slavery, and then the real litmus test for where this world is going to go is what percentage of the population buys into that. If a significant amount of the population does, then I think it's game over, because whatever little percentage of people remain independent, they will quickly get crushed, and they will have nobody to turn to, because their own relatives and neighbors and friends and whatnot, they will have already adopted the new system.
On that note, let's do a brief advertisement. Idealabsdc.com, supplements made by Georgi Dinkov. I'm going to ask you about that in a second. Patreon.com/Danny Roddy. I do coaching. There's a few spots open up. I think I'll open up new email ones soon. And you can follow Georgi on Twitter at, I don't have your Twitter open. It's twitter.com/hate it. You can follow me on Twitter. But you really, since the censorship is going to be coming down pretty hard, I would suggest following us on BitChute, bitchute.com/Danny Roddy. And again, I don't know how censorship proof these places are. I'm sure they're not at all. But t.me/Danny Roddy is the Telegram, and you can stay up to date. And then also there's a site called Odyssey, which I've been uploading to. But again, I just expect, we were talking before the show started, somebody in the comments said that Patrick Timpone's channel got deleted. I don't know if somebody in the comments can confirm that. But that is pretty scary because I don't really see him as some gigantic pillar of health information, but I could be wrong. Maybe they've had their eye on him or something. But yeah, that
or he got reported. Like I said,
or he got reported.
Now they're having like this horizontal totalitarianism.
Yeah.
As Catherine Fitz said, it's us, it's not them.
Mm-hmm.
Like they figure out a way to turn us against each other, and a lot of us are complicit into also building a lot of the tools that are being used to oppress us.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with that, but I don't think she has a viable solution. She's saying, oh, we need to stop helping the empire build the tools that oppress us.
Mm-hmm.
How would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
She's saying, well, you need to, if you're working for a big pharma and creating these poisonous drugs, you need to quit and go do something else. Like what? If all you've done is design drugs your whole life, what are you going to do? I mean, I guess a percentage of, of very talented and adaptable people with good metabolism can probably come up with another career, right? I don't think it's a viable thing for everybody, right? Or she's saying like, oh, the other thing she said is like, oh, if the 20 wives of big pharma executives walk up to them and say like, you know what, you're disgusting, no more sex. Mm-hmm. How do you foresee that happening? I mean, like
they could always go to Epstein's Island, so it doesn't matter.
Have you seen the movie Eyes Wide Shut? I mean, there was a scene there that that's pretty much what happened. That girl tried to walk away and she disappeared. Mm-hmm. I mean, these people don't stop at anything. The story about Barry Sherman, the billionaire in Canada, I don't know how many people remember that story. It was actually officially labeled as suicide, and it was going to remain as a suicide, officially labeled suicide, murder-suicide, I'm sorry. He killed his wife and then he hanged himself, right? Mm-hmm. And then it was only after exhumation and repeated autopsies that they found out that they were actually murdered, right? Still there's, and this person was one of the richest people in Canada. So imagine what happens to a, less of a lesser visible person like the wife of a pharma executive, right? I mean, she can very easily be suicided. She can be injected with something and then be like, oh, she committed suicide. Or, look, I mean, her husband works for a pharma company. Guess what? I don't want to give a percentage, but like almost I think it's fair to say every big pharma company is in one shape or fashion involved with the deep state developing some kind of a biological weapon to be used, preferably, outside of the United States. But guess what? If they need to use it domestically, I don't think they're going to bat an eyelash.
Dark episode. Okay. Okay. So
no, it's not dark. It's just being aired, right? Sure. Just like what was his name? Will Smith, the actor. They asked him like, "Do you think racism is increasing?" He said, "No, it's just getting filmed."
Mm-hmm, yeah. Okay. Idealabs Tokovit giveaway. I'm going to announce the winner, but subscribe on BitChute.com/Roddy. We've really a lot of people subscribed. I think I only had like 100 subscriptions on here, and now I have 250. So that is heartening. I appreciate it. Thank you guys. Leave a comment on this episode. So immediately after this, I'll download the episode, upload it. And so just wait a second and then leave a comment on that one. And then DANIMATIV is the winner of Tokovit. So you need to send me email at danny@dannyroddy.com. Then I'll send it to Georgie and then we'll play a little back and forth. And then we'll ship out the Tokovit. So appreciate it. Okay, that's all. Before people kill us, maybe we should talk about health stuff.
I mean, there's some pretty cool articles over the last 2 weeks, I guess, that accumulated. The one that I really liked is that I think that says like the endotoxin is behind the lethality of the 1918 flu and the Black Death, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at some of the big arguments that are proponents of the current immune theater, let's go it this way.
I don't know why we're being so careful now.
Say it again?
We're being so careful now, but we haven't in the past.
Yes, too careful, yes. So, I mean, if you look at some of the main arguments that are being used to justify the lockdowns and everything else, we're like, oh, if we don't do it now, look at what happened in 1918. Mm-hmm. Tens of millions of people died. And like, before you know it, something like the Black Death pandemic may be upon us. If you listen to Mr. Gates, who I'm sure will be thrilled, or he's probably actively working on, engineering some kind of like a pandemic like that, because not many people know, but just a few months ago, he released a company that he owns released 750 million genetically engineered mosquitoes in Florida to basically combat the infestation with mosquitoes that are there. How? By these mosquitoes are sterile, and they're going to outcompete the fertile individuals, and before you know it, there'll be no more mosquitoes. Yeah. And I'm thinking, like, this is really some sick stuff, man. Like, intervening like that in the hierarchy of nature. You have no idea, like, what happens if there are no mosquitoes? I mean, other animals depend on them, right? I'm sure there are at least 20 species that depend on eating those mosquitoes. And if mosquitoes are gone, maybe these species will be gone too. Like, he don't just do that, but he's already doing it. And he's actually making a ton of money selling those mosquitoes to third world countries that apparently have a huge problem with malaria and other diseases, which admittedly, these diseases are a big problem, right? But I think the approach that he's taken is just completely untested. Not unlike the vaccines for the current immune theater. Go ahead.
Just to interject, did you see this article on Zero Hedge? People have known about this for a long time, but it's the controversial lockdown proponent Bill Gates quietly funding plan to dim the sun's rays.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, that's.
Anyways, that's just like another thing to his mosquito transmission of what was the purpose for vaccines?
To outcompete fertile mosquitoes, and basically, like, if they don't have mates, like over a few generations, the mosquitoes will all die out or be like drastically reduced in number.
Wasn't it to administer vaccinations though through mosquitoes or something as well?
I think it has been tried. There was a project.
It was something psychotic. It was something really weird.
But actually, the CIA had a project in the 60s to infect people with AIDS and not AIDS. They didn't call it AIDS at the time, but to basically transfer viruses using mosquitoes and infect enemy armies. They said it was all done to protect the Americans in the Western world. And I'm sure Mr. Gates got the technology from them. He's not a biotechnologist. And if you look at the company that he owns that released those mosquitoes, I don't think it's their technology either. Mm-hmm. They're just saying that they're using an advanced patent pending technology, which usually means the CIA gave them a free lease on that, and it's going to ask for money later.
Okay, so nothing more on the endotoxin Black Death?
No, basically, the argument the main argument used for the lockdowns is that basically if we don't lock down, we're going to have tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of people dying, and they're using specifically the 1918 flu pandemic and the Black Death. Mm-hmm. But as this article says in passing, because the article really is about a blood biomarker of endotoxin overload, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. They're saying that the cytokine storms, which endotoxin is known to cause, were actually behind the lethality of the 1980 flu pandemic and the Black Death. So it's not the pathogens. It's something that happens together with the pathogens that's causing the cytokine storm. Mm-hmm. Now, the pathogens themselves, at least the virus, has no known mechanism through which it can cause a cytokine storm. Mm-hmm. Something else is doing that, at least in the viral cases. And that something is endotoxin, right? In the Black Death, which is caused by a bacteria, you can argue that the bacteria itself, because it contains endotoxin in its wall, maybe that's how the bacteria itself is causing the cytokine storm. But it has already been ruled out by several different tests. And again, in people with bacterial sepsis, it is known that, if it was the bacteria that was causing this, right, when you administer antibiotics, these people should be okay. But that's not how it works. Basically, once the cytokine storm is already ongoing, it's like a vicious cycle. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it amplifies itself with every cycle. So it's something else going on, and that's something they said in that post is the lipopolysaccharide, also known as endotoxin. That is what causes most cytokine storms when you have a severe viral and or bacterial infection. And whether this infection turns into a severe one is determined largely by the energetic state of the cell. Multiple studies have shown both older and more recent ones, and I think Ray has cited some of the older ones in his articles, showing that a well-energized lipophilic cell is almost impervious to penetration by most pathogens. So they need something. They need the cell to have an increased membrane permeability, even if you believe in membranes. And that's something, in order for that to happen, that happens when the levels of ATP in the cell drop, the cell structure gets disorganized, and it also leads to basically, with the potassium and magnesium leaking outside of the cell, that also leads to the calcium and sodium coming into the cell, and that creates this energetic crash. And now basically the cell is open to uptake of pretty much anything that's floating in the bloodstream. And if they're pathogens, that's all they need. So the pathogens by themselves, even very lethal ones like rabies, Ebola and whatnot, have been shown to not really be dangerous to healthy cells. And you can make the cells even more impervious to damage or infection by administering a serotonin antagonist. I posted on the forum a study, must be at least 4, if not even 5 years ago, showing that cyproheptadine and Benadryl can block fully the infection of cells by HIV, by rabies, by Ebola, and a number of different other ones like what is it called, like dengue fever, and some other acute hemorrhaging fever, viral virus that caused these conditions. And the cells basically became completely immune. The viruses just couldn't get the cell infected, and that led the scientists to hypothesize that the serotonin receptor 2 is required for viral infection. Required. In other words, if you block it or you don't have it, viruses are of no danger to you.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying the endotoxin activates this receptor that causes a cytokine
TLR4.
storm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that reduces tissue integrity, and that fits in with this alternative view of autoimmunity and just immunity in general. But Polly Matzinger says, when healthy tissues induce tolerance, when distressed, they stimulate inflammatory immunity. And,
yes.
And so again, that fits in with your whole model that you're talking about, right?
So if you activate TLR4, which is what the endotoxin, that's the primary activator, is the endotoxin, but also because it's not specific for endogenous endotoxin, right? Endotoxin meaning inside. So if you get a bacterial infection, most of that bacteria also contains endotoxin. And that's the mechanism through which the body, unfortunately, is non-selective, and it doesn't have a way of knowing that, oh, is this the endotoxin coming from my own colon/gut, or is it because of the bacteria that came from the outside? But I guess evolution, from the point of view of evolution, is it doesn't matter. They're equally bad, right? So it's the activation of TLR4 that triggers an immune response, right? But unfortunately, if the cytokines, the release of cytokines into to the bloodstream, if it goes beyond a certain threshold, that is actually a signal that the infection is not under control. So the body releases even more, and at some point organs start to fail. Or actually, even before the organs, cells start to fail, and then they dump their mitochondria and their genetic material into the bloodstream. And I think we've discussed with you before that basically the fragments of the cell, especially the mitochondrial ones, act indistinguishably on the cellular defense systems as if you had a viral infection or a bacterial infection, and that triggers yet another cytokine response. More cells die, and on it goes until eventually you have a critical multi-organ failure. Doesn't have to be multi-organ. And if your heart fails, right? If your liver fails, you're done. I mean, it doesn't have to be a multi-organ failure, but that's what it usually leads to.
Yeah. So a person that would be susceptible to those things would already be in ill health. They'd be compromised already.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And there are several ways to do that. And as much as we've discussed this until people are already blue in the face, the NAD to the NADH ratio is actually a very good indicator. The mitochondrial one is a very good indicator of overall cellular metabolic/energetic status. Now, because it's difficult to measure the mitochondrial ratio, a better surrogate that I should say a surrogate that's more easily detectable and can be done in blood is the pyruvate to lactate ratio. And this is corroborated by recent studies on the immune theater patients, showing that more than 40% of them, by the ones that died, at least 40% of them, at the time they got admitted into the hospital, before they even got intubated, before even they got critical, 40% of them already had lactic acidosis. So that means the pyruvate to lactate ratio will be very, very low, at least 40%. And I suspect it's a lot more. And I think it comes down to it's not a test that's automatically done when you get admitted to the hospital. It's only if the doctors suspect that you have a metabolic acidosis. Only then they're going to run the tests. So I suspect it's a lot more. I think it's probably everybody. If you get into to a point where you need to be in the hospital, there's no way your lactate will be normal. It's just not possible. I mean, if that was the case, you wouldn't be in that energetically decrepit state to require hospitalization.
Question that shows my ignorance on everything, but the lactic acid, I know it's causing harm locally, but how is it activating the stress systems, like the classical ones? Is it acting directly on the pituitary?
I think it's acting on the adrenals. There's several studies showing that it can stimulate the release of cortisol even in the absence of ACTH. So it's similar to the polyunsaturated fats. And I think another thing that it does is basically lactic acid stimulates lipolysis. So basically you're getting these PUFA flooding the bloodstream from the tissues, because PUFA gets preferentially stored when you eat it, and then preferentially released when there is a like an event triggering excessive lipolysis. And then once that PUFA is in the bloodstream, you're getting all kinds of bad things happening. Some of it gets metabolized into the inflammatory mediators, right? Basically, whatever non-metabolized PUFA remains synergizes with estrogen, makes the cells more hydrophilic, right? So it increases susceptibility to infection. PUFA activates, just like lactic acid, it activates the HPA axis. I know that it can directly activate the adrenals, but there's some evidence that the prostaglandins can actually act on the pituitary and release, actually even on the hypothalamus, and get to a point where we increase the release of both CRH and ACTH. So it's really a nasty situation. I mean, you only need to take a look at what PUFA is capable of activating in terms of the stress system to know that there's no way in hell like eating these things in substantial amounts, it can be good for any organism.
And then it's displacing carbon dioxide, so it's messing with your oxygen supply as well, right?
Yeah, that's the other thing. Basically, if your lactic acid is high, this means carbon dioxide is low, right? And then if carbon dioxide is low, I mean, your hemoglobin saturation, oxygen saturation, maybe 100%, but your tissue oxygenation can get to a point where you're actually in full-blown hypoxia, and that's actually been seen when people with the immune theater disease go to the hospital and they already have blue lips, blue nose, blue eyelids, etc., blue fingertips, and the doctors put them on oxygen. They don't improve, and the doctor's like, well, what's going on? So they think it's a lung dysfunction, and there is some of that because serotonin is high. We already know that anti-serotonin drugs help control the immune theater. but basically it's not all about the lungs. It's the lungs are doing their best, but even if they're absorbing the oxygen, which has been confirmed because they give these people oxygen to breathe and then they measure the oxygen saturation, and if it's 92 or something, or like below 90 before admission to the hospital, let's say it jumps to 95 or even higher, yet their condition doesn't improve. They continue to be hypoxic. And doctors are scratching their heads saying like, well, what is going on? Well, lactic acidosis can do that for you, right? Metabolic dysfunction and lack of production of CO2, that can do that to you. A cytokine storm can most certainly do that to you because it attacks every organ, right? So it's really just it's the amplification of the stress response. There was a very similar stage, very similar developments are seen in people with AIDS when they're about to die from AIDS, and people with cancer. The final months of the cancer patient's life, when they're becoming really, really cachectic, are actually characterized by extreme lipolysis. And several studies came out in the last 2-3 years showing that blocking lipolysis not only can actually restore the organism to good health, but in many cases makes the cancers disappear. And most of these studies use the beta blocker drugs like propranolol. It's not the best choice, but it shows you directly that the stress response is involved in turning the cancer from a unpleasant and annoying condition into a lethal one. It's really that's what kills most of these people. That's what causes the cachexia. And what strikes me as particularly troubling is that it's shown that before this process starts, there is a very high conversion of white fat into brown fat, which is driven by adrenaline, right? And a lot of these gurus now on the internet are recommending cold thermogenesis for browning your fat because you're going to burn more calories. Well, guess what? It's the same process that kills patients with advanced cancer. I mean, there are some cases where they die because the cancer is pressing against a vital organ or ruptures or presses against the brain or some vital system. But in the majority of the cases, they die because of the cachexia, and that cachexia is indistinguishable. It's, yes, a lot more intense, but it's indistinguishable biochemically from the one triggered by the change that's leading to this cachexia is the same as the one seen by this cold thermogenesis and all these other exercises that attempt to turn your white fat into brown.
Speaking of detailing the stress response, sugar, sucrose lowers stress-induced cortisol.
That's right.
You can see my screen, right?
I can see your screen,
Okay.
and I got a comment on this study on my Twitter, because every study that I post on the blog, like the title and the keywords, the tags that I put on it, get posted automatically on my Twitter account. And I think 2 or 3 doctors responded to me, saying like, yes, that's great. It's unfortunate that sugar is getting such a bad reputation. I recommend it to my patients all the time, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm like, oh, wow, I guess not everything is lost. If you want to make this episode less dark, some doctors are still in their right minds.
That's good stuff. Good to hear. Lighten up this dark episode. What other articles were you interested in?
Let's see.
I put the aromatase inhibitors are estrogenic in the title.
Yes, I think that's actually pretty good. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that kind of vindicates Ray in his stubborn refusal to approve of usage of aromatase inhibitors, with the exception, and I will take the credit for this one, of lately people have been bugging him about exemestane, and he's been saying like, yes, I think in cases of severe estrogen dominance, I think trying a few milligrams daily may be highly therapeutic, right? But he still cautions with like, I don't think this should be done long term. There's safer ways. But just like using DHT, which is a strong androgen and an anti-estrogen, he says that in drastic cases, these things can be very, very helpful, at least to get the system back, to normal, and then you focus on diet and thyroid and everything else. So unfortunately, it looks like some of these aromatase inhibitors, the non-steroidal ones, I want to emphasize, because exemestane is actually a steroid, and they're the 2 most famous non-steroidal ones are anastrozole and letrozole. Now, this study says that anastrozole is a very potent agonist of estrogen receptor alpha, with about the same affinity as estradiol. So it doesn't get any much worse than that. And actually, they found out that it's at the low dosages, which actually are used clinically, because the typical dosage for anastrozole for a person trying to lower excess estrogen is about 1 milligram daily. Some people use half a milligram. 1 milligram is standard. Women with advanced estrogen receptor positive breast cancer may use up to 2 milligrams, get prescribed. At these doses are exactly achieving the concentration range which the study found to be basically sufficient for a very potent activation of the estrogen receptor. At higher concentrations, anastrozole actually restored its anti-estrogenic effects. I guess the inhibition of aromatase basically balanced the activation of the estrogen receptor. But at lower dosages, the clinically relevant dosages, anastrozole was a very potent estrogen itself. And they're saying letrozole was not. But if you look at the structure of those 2 drugs and the fact that they cause identical side effects, I will be very cautious with letrozole as well. They're about almost the same chemical. Letrozole basically was developed using anastrozole as a starting structure, but basically they changed the molecule in a way that increases its half-life. So unlike anastrozole, which you need to take every day or sometimes even twice a day, letrozole is taken twice a week. But the molecule, the structure of the molecule, and it's the constituents, the actual individual chemical elements are the same between the 2 molecules. So if you're going to be using aromatase inhibitors, keep that in mind. And it's likely that steroidal ones like exemestane, formestane, atamestane, progesterone, but as far as the pharma aromatase inhibitors are concerned, if your doctor is pushing one of those, you'll be better off asking for a steroidal one, because they have been shown to have anti-estrogenic effects, specifically exemestane, which when you take it, it metabolizes into a steroid that's very similar to the steroid boldenone, which bodybuilders inject with, and it's a potent androgen. So it's not only anti-estrogenic, some of its metabolites are androgenic, and that has an additional beneficial effects in cases of estrogen dominance. And that has already that knowledge is already exists and has been exploited, or at least used by the FDA to approve several strong androgens based on dihydrotestosterone as treatments for breast cancer. I guess the most famous one is drostanolone, also known as masterone.
Yeah, this is important because there's like a confabulatory way of people that talk about drugs on the internet, and they'll say like, oh, it's anti-serotonin or it's anti-estrogen, when it has a multitude of different effects.
Yeah.
And also
the idea about selectivity is bunk. And the sooner people realize that and approach every drug with the idea that it has multitude of effects, even non-genomic ones. In other words, forget about the receptor. Even mainstream medicine now is saying like, we thought that it's only the nuclear receptors that matter, but guess what? We found a bunch of them in the membrane. And by the way, even without those, estrogen is somehow still capable of causing cancer. And there is actually a post on that too. So we may want to do that one next.
Oh yeah. After this, do you want to take a video question?
Sure.
But yeah, let's do the cancer one because that fits right in. Okay, here we go. Okay. Even non-carcinogenic estrogens can cause cancer.
And I had a post about estrogen drives the progression on estrogen receptor negative breast cancer. I posted it maybe like 2 months ago, and I got several doctors emailing me saying like, lol, right? Like, I'm laughing my ass off. Like this is like when will medicine learn that the terms that we use are probably dead on arrival, and even by the time we coin something like triple negative breast cancer, we already know it's wrong, right? But anyways, it's a similar thing, a similar topic here. Somehow, big pharma, the pharmaceutical industry, in tandem with the medical industry, managed to convince people that some estrogens are non-carcinogenic, despite being almost the exact same molecule. And the example here that I give is the regular estrogen that we produce is known as 17-beta estradiol, right? But there is another one. It's a very close, it's a structural isomer known as 17-alpha estradiol. And they're saying, oh, yes, it binds and activates the estrogen receptors, but it has a potency of only 1% of the regular estradiol, so it cannot possibly be causing cancer. Well, guess what? The study from Columbia University back in 2003, because that's what the studies from 2003 said, nope, actually in the right environment, even the non-estrogenic estrogens are actually perfectly capable of causing the exact same cancers, in this case kidney cancer, that the regular estrogen was capable of doing. So it's really no substance can be viewed in isolation without taking into account the situation of the organism. And the situation in this case was when the non-carcinogenic estrogen was administered, when oxidative stress was high, it was just as carcinogenic as the regular one. And what causes oxidative stress? It's not high mitochondrial activity, which is, if you remember that post, it's the exact opposite. It's a blockade, usually somewhere along the electron transport chain, but sometimes, even though much more rarely, in the Krebs cycle as well. But it's usually the electron transport chain. So when those electrons have nowhere to go, what do? They attack the molecular oxygen, and they create all these radicals that basically attack the PUFA in your tissues, and all hell breaks loose, and you get cancer. Even when your doctor has given you the safe estrogen ethinyl estradiol, 17-alpha ethinyl estradiol, which was used to be used as a contraceptive. I think it's still used to this day, but they're trying to phase it out because the Catholic Church is now knows that estrogen doesn't prevent contraception, but it prevents only implantation. So now they're trying to replace all the estrogen-containing contraceptives with the synthetic progestins, like a single drug, only a progestin, because they already know it's capable of acting as a contraceptive. So estrogen, and I think that may be one of the reasons why the medical industry and big pharma is actually now trying to has been attacking the findings from the Women Health Initiative study. And now if you look at there are actually ads now on TV starting to advertise and push the return of estrogen HRT for women, for menopausal women. They're saying, the Women Health Initiative studies, they were poorly designed. They were using very high doses of estrogens. If you use a lower dosage, in proper scheduling. Estrogen is not carcinogenic. I think somebody should send him that paper from Colombia and tell him to like eat it for breakfast or something, because even a non-carcinogenic estrogen was perfectly carcinogenic in the right/wrong environment.
Great stuff. Okay, let me interject here. Okay, obviously January 8th today, Georgia Dinkov. Next week, also Georgia Dinkov. And then we'll have Ray on the last Friday of this month. And so if we're still on YouTube, those shows will happen. If anybody has any live stream, I know D Live exists, but I don't really know of any other live streaming platforms. So that's kind of the thing that is not prevalent on the internet right now, like live streaming formats. I know Rockfin does live streaming. I don't really want to do like a paywall or anything. But, okay, there it is. And what it was, I was going to do a video question. Do you, let's take one from, I think this is a question from Sam. Let me hide this. Okay. Can you hear this?
Hey, Danny. Hey, Georgie.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Okay, let me just make sure. Did you guys hear this in the comment section? Please confirm. I'm pretty sure you can. Okay, let me just go.
Hey, Danny. Hey, Georgie. Thanks so much for all the content you guys have been providing recently. I've been really enjoying it. My question is in regards to cholesterol, specifically blood levels of cholesterol. It seems in the space of functional medicine especially, people are under the impression that if your blood cholesterol level gets too low, that it will affect natural androgen production and steroidogenesis. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this. There's been a couple papers I've read recently about it that seem to suggest that so long as there wasn't any exogenous effect on production, for instance, a statin, if your blood cholesterol levels are naturally low, it does not seem to hamper production, even when LDL was suppressed to levels of 20 nanograms per deciliter, which is crazy low. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, if blood cholesterol levels really do matter and if they can be too low for things like androgen production. Thanks so much. Bye.
You rule. Thanks, Sam. Okay, Georgie, what do you think?
I think it shouldn't be tested in isolation. So when you test cholesterol, you should be doing the test for the other steroids as well. So if your serum levels, if you're male, if your serum levels of testosterone, dihydrotestosterone and DHEA are in the normal range, preferably for those three in the upper 25th percentile, then it simply means you're converting the cholesterol properly into downstream hormones. However, if your cholesterol is low and you have what they call steroidopenia, which is low steroid levels of even one of those, then I think that's a very bad sign. And that's a situation that if it's due to a statin, it should be immediately discontinued and cholesterol levels should be restored. And this is such a fortuitous question because just last night I was reading a very long paper on using very simple techniques to distinguish cancer cells from regular cells in the absence of mutations. So first of all, I was surprised to even see such a paper because mainstream medicine says, oh, if a cell is cancerous, there has to be a mutation. Otherwise, it cannot be, right? You're somehow misdiagnosing it. So first thing, these authors are saying, that's crap. You have cancer cells, they become cancerous long before they actually start mutating, right? Mm-hmm. But what they found out is this: can we look at a structure of a cell and tell just by its structure and its composition and different metrics inside of it whether the cell is cancerous or not, whether the cell is sick or not, right? And what they found out is that single unifying characteristics of every single cancer cell, no matter what cancer type they looked at, was increased membrane fluidity, determined almost entirely by lower level of cholesterol in the membrane, and often combined with very high levels of esterified cholesterol in the membrane, right? So it's like basically the ratio of the amount of total cholesterol in all cancer cells, at least in the membrane, is drastically lower than healthy cells. And they said that this could distinguish It had very high specificity and sensitivity in the upper 90th percentile for both, right? So it's almost like a very reliable way of diagnosing cancer way before it starts even overloading with lactic acid, or at least the cell is about to become cancerous. And the second thing that is basically low level of free cholesterol and drastically higher levels of esterified cholesterol. If you remember Ray's newsletter, when he talked about one of the defining features of aging, and by now we know that cancer and aging, it's really the same disease, but it manifests differently and over different time periods, that one of the defining features of aging was drastic decrease in free cholesterol and increase in esterified cholesterol. So if your cholesterol is low, I wouldn't call it naturally low. If it's low, I would never test it in isolation. I would test it with all the steroids. And if the cholesterol is low, but all of your steroids are fine, especially for males, testosterone and DHT, because these are indicators primarily of how well your gonads are working. And if the gonads are working well, there is an inverse relationship between gonadal activity and pituitary activity and adrenal, right? And there's also a direct correlation between gonadal activity and thyroid. So if the gonads can be used as a surrogate for how well your thyroid is working and whether the stress system is kept under control. So cholesterol is low, androgens high, or at least in the upper normal range, then I think things are okay. Cholesterol is low and at least one of these androgens, or at least beneficial hormones, is low, then I think we have a problem. And that you need to evaluate what is causing that, right? And then find ways to raise cholesterol. And two of the most reliable ways are eating sugar and eating saturated fat. You can also eat foods that contain cholesterol themselves, such as eggs. But even FDA recently, last year, not so recently, changed its recommendations on dietary cholesterol, saying dietary cholesterol will not affect your blood cholesterol levels in a statistically significant manner. So they're saying you can eat anything you want. So 50 years of dietary recommendations gone out the window in overnight. So yeah, you can eat eggs, but I think it's a little bit of a misconception that eating eggs is the best way to raise your cholesterol. The best way is to eat sugars and saturated fat.
Remember when Ray said that he thought that people with a level of what's the measurement? 2000. Let me check my little handy thing right here. Milligrams per deciliter. He thought 200 milligrams per deciliter, people were lucky to have that amount because they could safely take thyroid. And so whenever somebody sends me a cholesterol that's 120 or 130 or 140, usually in the limited amount of people that I've talked to, they usually have some kind of bowel issue. And then apparently Ray has talked about, isn't cholesterol bind endotoxin in some way, shape, or form?
The pregnanes too. Mm-hmm. So cholesterol is basically it's a cholesterol type of hormone, but once that fatty acid side chain gets cleaved, it becomes a pregnane. And I have a post that was done not too long ago, maybe 3 months ago, showing that pregnane steroids, but specifically progesterone and pregnenolone, can directly bind and deactivate endotoxin. Oh, wow. And I suspect cholesterol can too.
So yeah, I have a very simplistic way of looking at it. But if the cholesterol is very low, if the sugar didn't work, if eating I think Ray said that calcium and vitamin D were also important, presumably for helping the liver produce cholesterol. And then in a very old interview, I don't know if he still holds this stance, but he said that when a person was taking thyroid, their cholesterol would go down to 170 or 180. Just in, again, my own use case, I think when I don't take thyroid, my cholesterol hovers at 200 or 210, and then it goes down to that range when I'm taking a grain or two. And so, I don't know if that's
a couple of things that I just remembered. I think we've discussed this one of the first podcasts, that low LDL precedes cancer diagnosis by more than a decade. So it's almost certainly not a good sign if you have low cholesterol, unless the steroid hormones are also at a good level. So low cholesterol and low steroids, not a good sign, right? And also the second thing is, because we talked about endotoxin, now I'm actually certain the cholesterol can deactivate endotoxin, because when you have elevated endotoxin, which is done when you drink alcohol, your HDL levels jump. And HDL is the protein that transports cholesterol back to the liver. So if your LDL doesn't change, but your HDL jumps up, means something in your body is using the cholesterol for something, and that needs to get transported back to the liver. And one of the most, and it's known that endotoxin raises HDL. So I think it doesn't directly prove it, but there are very few other things, especially considering the fact that alcohol raises HDL, but not LDL, and knowing that alcohol is a very good activator of intestinal permeability, which increases the endotoxin in the blood. I think it's pretty plausible to say that cholesterol has some kind of either a direct deactivating effect or one of its immediate metabolites is involved. But if it was a metabolite, then HDL wouldn't jump. HDL only jumps if it has to transport cholesterol back to the liver.
Great stuff. Do you want to go over an article, take another question?
Let's do another question.
Okay. I don't know which one this is. Let me hide this again. Okay, here we go.
Hey, Danny and Georgie. Thanks so much for doing these. I just have a question about like hygiene, and I'm just wondering, I've noticed that a lot of natural toothpaste brands, as well as the conventional ones, will have hydrated silica in them. And given that like we like swallow like a little bit each time, I'm just wondering like kind of like what you guys would recommend for keeping your teeth clean on the surface. Thank you.
I think that was Ken. Thank you, Ken, for that. I sincerely appreciate it. Georgie, what do you think?
So in terms of plaque on the teeth, I've noticed that actually taking things like vitamin K and eating gelatin and in general keeping the gut clean drastically reduces plaque on the teeth to the point where some people that I know don't even need to brush them. They do other things like they floss, right? If something gets stuck in between their teeth. But in terms of flushing, in terms of brushing their teeth, I think it's just an indication of intestinal health. So if you get the intestinal health in order, I think this would improve. It will drastically reduce the amount of plaque that needs to be brushed off, right? And I think Ray mentioned that a few dentists discovered that they didn't need to treat their patient's periodontal disease anymore after they put them on laxatives, right? So to me, that's a strong indication that the way your teeth look from the outside, in other words, what's on top of them, is an indication of intestinal health. So if you handle that, things should improve. In terms of actually killing the bacteria that's causing cavities in the mouth, I think doing like a little bit of a mouthwash with a weak methylene blue solution, I think that's probably the safest you can get. You can add a little bit of xylitol, that non-metabolizable sugar alcohol. It's now very popular to be put in chewing gums, but it's drastically expensive when you buy a chewing gum like that. So you can buy it by the pound from Amazon or in some other vendors, and you can create like a 5% xylitol solution in water, and then add 5 milligrams of methylene blue per liter, or more or less per quart, if you want to use the American/Canadian, because she had a switch of Saskatchewan. Maybe she's in Canada. So the quart is almost a liter. So you can use basically 5 milligrams of methylene blue per quart/liter of that xylitol, 5% xylitol solution, and then you can use that to brush your teeth, and that should be good enough. In fact, I know people who've been using that for a few months, and they used to have bleeding gums, which Listerine actually made that issue worse. But now, by using that mouthwash, now their gums don't bleed anymore. Now, I'm not sure if that's just directly due to the effect that it has on the gums, or maybe they swallow a little and it improves intestinal health as well, because I know that's involved as well. But I know that the mouthwash helped both their teeth and their gums.
I was talking to somebody fairly recently, and I think we talked about antibiotics, and they took them. And then the next time I got on like Skype with them, they're like, Danny, you should have told me that antibiotics had such a positive effect on the teeth. And I was like, oh, I just forgot. But they're like, but that's the thing they really noticed. And I've noticed that. And then I know that wasn't necessarily her question of internal things, rather cleaning. But I multiple people, since I made that video about implementing Ray's dietary stuff, and I mentioned antibiotics, and I've received a lot of email about people using antibiotics, and people saying that it calmed teeth problems seems fairly frequent. So that's good stuff. What do you want, Georgie? Article, question?
Let's see. I mean, like, can you expand those articles? Because the way it opened up on your screen, I only saw like the last those 6 tabs.
I can go to any of them though. I think we went through most of. We didn't talk about the obesity.
We went through those, but I think some of the older ones that are not shown on that screen. I think some like there's some interesting ones there too. Let me just. Should I open the log?
Oh, just what am I doing? Here we go. Okay, so endotoxin behind sugar,
I think that's pretty well known. I mean, well, let's just go through it very quickly. So people with obesity, I was going to go like the first one, the very top. People with obesity are known to have a state of chronic inflammation. And it's been a mystery, and it's actually one of the contributing factors, probably one of the main causative factors of diabetes and insulin resistance. It's not necessarily the obesity itself. At this point, we have multiple studies confirming the obesity paradox, right? So we know that there are good things. I shouldn't say good, but like the obesity by itself, there's strong evidence that it's not enough. There's something else going on, and that something is inflammation. But medicine is like, okay, so what's causing these people's fatty tissue to be inflamed? It makes no sense, because the fat even if you blame the PUFA actually, when it's inside the fat cell, it's largely inert, right? It's not getting metabolized into inflammatory mediators. What is going on? And they found out that it's basically endotoxin is the major cause, because when they took mice and they deleted genetically their endotoxin receptor, these mice became just as obese as the other group. Both groups were getting fed extremely high diet and low carbs. So another warning for the low carb crowd. But the mice without TLR4 had almost zero inflammation, and also their insulin sensitivity stayed normal. And they were able to eat glucose. So they were obese but non-diabetic. They were just like normal mice in all other respects except the extra weight. So once again, endotoxin basically creates this, what is it? Endotoxin. Yeah.
I was just typing in. I had a paper that said like one of the primary things that endotoxin did was promote lipolysis. And so I'm sorry if you went over it already, but the promotion of fat gain, would that just be by shifting the redox balance and causing the synthesis of new fat? Is that how it would cause actual weight gain, synthesis of new fat?
I think the main actually effect is that whenever you have chronic inflammation, your cortisol will be chronically high. And cortisol is the main, maybe the main, followed closely by estrogen. It's maybe the main hormone that is responsible for the creation and storage of fat. So cortisol activates the fatty acid synthase. Cortisol inhibits the glucuronidation of fat by the liver. So basically, whatever fat you eat, if it exceeds your the caloric requirements, it will get stored. And it also inhibits the cortisol lowers core body temperature. So it will inhibit that uncoupling effect that saturated fats have, or like thyroid has, or hormones like progesterone and other like thermogenic hormones have. So it will just bring you closer to hibernation, more or less.
So the endotoxin is more of like an activator of the other things that are causing
of the stress system, right? I mean, if there's inflammation, the body interprets that as similar. Remember, TLR4 is basically the sensor for not just endotoxin, but it's the non-specific sensor for danger, right? Mostly infectious danger. The body says, "Oh, something's going on. I'm under attack," right? And it could be endotoxin, could be exotoxin from bacteria that's from the outside, right? But in this case, it was endotoxin because once they deleted the entire receptor. So some people may come back and say, well, how do you know this? The obesity is not caused by bacteria from the outside? Because I get a lot of hate email for bashing endotoxin, and I'm sure Ray does too, saying like, well, okay, we get it, TLR4, but how do you know that it's endotoxin primarily activating that receptor? Could be something else. And that's a fair point. But there have been studies that more or less show that even if it's from the outside, it's a relatively minor factor, because what was that experiment that I saw? It was the caloric restriction. So the animals that do caloric restriction, which drastically reduces their endotoxin, and that's actually probably the main, if not the only, beneficial effect. They got exposed to like multiple different environments to test for resilience, and some of those environments were highly bacterial one. They were exposed to like some highly pathogenic bacteria, see if the animals will get killed more quickly or not. And some of that bacteria was gram-negative bacteria, which is the one that's basically mostly responsible for the endotoxin. And these animals, even though they were exposed to very high concentrations of that bacteria, endotoxin-containing bacteria, exogenously, their weight didn't change. So whatever is happening in terms of inflammation, if the TLR4 receptor is getting activated and that's causing inflammation, it's in all likelihood it's the endotoxin that we have ourselves, due to the bacteria that's in our gut.
Great stuff. We can wrap it up pretty soon. Idealabsdc.com. I want to ask you a question about that in a moment. That's Georgie's supplement company. No sponsors on this show. No money is exchanged between Georgie and I. This is Georgie's deal. He makes the supplements. I appreciate him spending time on here and just for the fun of it and something to do, So Georgie, thank you so much for just repeatedly providing your time and coming here, asking for nothing in return. So we appreciate it.
It's one of my few getaways where I can feel sane.
Yeah, I really did.
I live among insane creatures. I almost 24/7.
I really did miss not just doing the stream these last. What was it? Was it 2 weeks we had off?
Yeah,
It was kind of a bummer. So yeah, I am.
Yeah, I felt like, oh my god, what I'm going to do on Friday? Have you noticed? I don't know if have you ever been like a big TV person or like you never enjoyed it much?
When I was younger and when I lived with my parents and stuff, we used to watch TV all the time, and then it just kind of slowly stopped when I moved out. But what were you gonna say?
Do you think that's common for people in general? Because I'm completely turned off by TV now. I can't find anything on TV that catches my attention.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm black pilled just like you, right? Let me just speaking of black pilled.
Yeah. Take your time. Thank you guys. Sincerely appreciate it. I normally ask you to like the episode, but it really doesn't matter. So please go to bitshoot.com/DannyRoddy and t.me/DannyRoddy and subscribe on there. Just something so you're following the show and you can get updates if you care. Georgie, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was saying that I've noticed that over the last, 3-4 years, even things that I used to enjoy, like, most Europeans like to watch soccer and things like that. But now I look at these things, I'm like, this is all for show. It's just like, it's just entertainment for the masses. And it's like, it's stupid. It's like, why are 22 people chasing a ball? Why was that interesting before?
Remind me if I forget, I do want to ask, Ray, about, I know people have written whole books on this, but how sports conditions people for politics and then how they think about society and things. It clearly induces some me versus them or puts people on teams. And so that my parents never watched sports, so I never watched sports, but I know people who are like fanatical about sports. And I also see some they have certain political leanings as well, and they're as equally rabid about their political leanings as they are about their football team. And so I'm like, yeah.
Who was the one who said like sports is the new religion? That's not actually. I don't think it's even a very recent thing. It's like somebody in the '60s, I think, said that. Basically, that now that religion is starting to die, it has to be replaced by something, or at least society or the powers that be, thought it needs to be replaced by something, and that something was, I think, Hollywood and the sports industry.
What was I doing here? Okay, I was going over Idealabs. I wanted to ask you a question about that. I do coaching, patreon.com/DannyRoddy. Georgie will be with me next week. Again, we'll do another show, and then Ray will be after that. And didn't I have one other thing I wanted to say? Oh, subscribe to the BitChute. And so again, bitshoot.com/DannyRoddy. And then when I post this episode, please leave a comment and you could win a bottle of Tocovit, provided very generously by Georgie Dinkov. Thank you, Georgie.
My pleasure.
Okay, we're running up on 1:33, so we should probably wrap it up pretty soon. Did you want to take another question?
Sure.
Okay. I forgot who this was. I'll just play it. Okay. Oh, this is James.
Hello. Big shout out to Danny and Georgie. My name's James. I'm from London. Enjoying the virtual get-togethers, particularly the Holy Trinity that is you, Danny, the Bulgarian wizard, and Ray Pete. That's been a long time coming. So yeah, I'm really thankful for that, guys. A quick question for my dad, 65 years old, just got his blood test back. He's got an elevated white blood cell count, which has been consistently happening year on year. Last year, he got referred to a hematologist, where his total white blood cell count was 15.4. And this year, 1 year later, that's risen again to 18.5. And the doctors made a note on the report saying there's a heterogeneous population of lymphoid cells. Some are showing nucleoli. The results of this are consistent with lymphocytic leukemia.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask Georgie what your thoughts are on the rising white blood cell count, what that's normally indicative of, and what sort of changes I can suggest to my dad, be it supplemental or lifestyle, that can help with this. Once again, thanks very much, guys.
Yeah.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah, that was good stuff. Okay, Georgie, what do you think?
Okay, so pretty simple answer, and probably pretty simple in terms of interventions. Estrogen is the primary driver of bone marrow proliferation, and virtually every single one of the blood cancers is known to be driven by high estrogen. And there were a few articles posted recently on the forum about a trend in medicine that tends to view the body as a system. Believe it or not, Ray is not the only one who's doing this, but now there's like a few others who are essentially plagiarizing Ray's ideas and presenting them as their own. And they're basically saying that you can actually use the red blood cell count and the white blood cell count as very good, reliable surrogates, respectively, for androgen levels and estrogen levels. And in fact, the RBC to the WBC ratio, they called it the genital ratio. Like I don't know why genital instead of just androgenic, but basically I would test his dad's prolactin and if possible the estrone sulfate. But chances are that, especially considering the age and the fact that most men beyond the age of 45 are already suffering from estrogen dominance, even if their blood tests are showing relatively normal, I would test that. And basically, pretty much anything that lowers estrogen should be highly therapeutic. There was a recent study that showed immediate and permanent remission of a person with, I think, the exact same condition, chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Acute lymphocytic leukemia that got treated with the abortion drug RU486, which, aside from the fact that it's a cortisol antagonist, recent studies have shown that it's also an estrogen antagonist as well. So instead of going to that drug, which tends to have side effects, I think something like higher dosage progesterone, and I would stick to progesterone only initially, higher dosage progesterone, and if necessary, maybe even like one of the aromatase inhibitors that we discussed earlier, should be able to bring this under control. Aspirin, vitamin E, vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin K, all of these are other anti-estrogenic interventions. Keeping excessive lipolysis at bay is also very important, because if his dad has primarily PUFA stored in the tissues, which is what most people do, especially with advancing age, whenever there's lipolysis, there's PUFA flooding the bloodstream, and it's basically synergizing with estrogen very powerfully. And PUFA by itself is known that overfeeding PUFA tends to cause primarily blood cancers, and I think that's a very good testament to their estrogenic effects. So good news is, in many cases, can actually be very quickly brought under control and even permanently cured, as they said in this case report. And in fact, because of the role of estrogen and cortisol in cancers, now RU486 may get an orphan drug designation by the FDA, because it has been shown, and I have a post on that on my blog from about 3 weeks ago, shown that it can actually cure terminal lung cancers, liver cancers, brain cancers, and people are saying, like, how is that possible? Well, that's what cortisol and excess lipolysis and excess estrogen does to you. So anti-estrogenic chemicals like RU486, but more safely, things like progesterone, maybe exemestane, aspirin, and all the fat-soluble vitamins, and avoiding PUFA, of course. I think this is a much safer intervention, should have the same effects, if not even better.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, James. Thanks, Georgie. Want to do one more question and then call it a night? Okay. We have a few more questions. People that sent them in, we'll definitely get to them, but we have a few extras. Okay, let me hide this. And I forgot who this question was. I think it was Raphael.
Hi, Danny. Hi, dudes. Metagolin rocks, by the way. Fucking love it.
Christoph.
Wanted to know if you could advise me on what to do. I have a friend who is on clonazepam, the benzodiazepine, to help her with panic attacks, and I would like to help her to get out of it. Is there any protocol you recommend? Anything that could help to wean her off this? Maybe replace it with something a bit less dangerous, but that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Christoph.
Yep.
Georgie, what do you think?
So clonazepam, also commercially known as klonopin, is perhaps the most addictive, profitable, and dangerous drug currently in use in psychiatry. It's even among psychiatrists known as a dirty drug.
Klonopin was kind of safe, no?
Klonopin is a benzodiazepine, but it's very potent.
Am I mixing up? What did he say?
I think he said clonazepam.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Clonazepam is just the generic name for klonopin. Klonopin is the trademark, or like the way it's being marketed. But clonazepam, if you say clonazepam, the doctors will know what you're talking about. It's the actual chemical. So it's a clonazepam. So it's a benzodiazepine, and it's just stronger with longer half-life and much more addictive. Compared to the older benzodiazepines such as Valium and Xanax. And it was created for only one reason, because the patent on those drugs expired, and they wanted something that would hook people for life and basically would make it almost impossible to withdraw from. Mm-hmm. Well, don't get discouraged. It's very possible to withdraw from it. And you can actually, if you can Google and say clonazepam diazepam substitution, or clonazepam Valium substitution, it will give you like a very specific protocol how you can start tapering off the clonazepam dosage and replacing it slowly, little by little, with Valium or another benzodiazepine that doesn't. Basically, it will have the same effects, but it will be like the effects will be more short-lived. Like will be like the half-life of the other benzodiazepines is shorter. Which actually makes them safer, ironically. So it's not a problem to take a pill several times a day. I actually view it as a problem to take a pill and then not having to take it for several more days. That's a problem. It means like this drug was specifically engineered to resist the metabolizing enzymes in your liver and various other organs, and their primary purpose is to protect you from from chemicals like that. So it is possible to replace clonazepam with any of the other benzodiazepines approved, but more importantly, multiple animal studies, unfortunately not many human ones, show that progesterone can fully substitute for any of the benzodiazepines. And since from what I heard, like from the recording, his friend is a girl, it makes even more sense to try the progesterone route. And if he doesn't want to do the hormones, niacinamide is a known ligand for the benzodiazepine receptor. And I think it's pretty safe even at very high dosages. Up to 3 grams daily in adults has been shown to have 0 side effects. I know Ray likes dosages that are drastically lower than that, but those lower dosages don't have the benzodiazepine effects. In order to get those effects, you need maybe 500 milligrams once or twice a day. And in fact, if you type niacinamide anxiety, you will find several case studies where doctors have reported how their patients have managed to completely wean themselves off of the benzodiazepine drugs and switch completely over to niacinamide, which is non-addictive, has the exact same effects, and guess what? It improves the energy metabolism in the brain, and which has been shown as early as the 1960s that if you raise carbon dioxide and lower lactic acid, you can actually cure for good really very severe psychiatric disorders. They did it with vitamin B1, thiamine, either on its own or in combination with acetazolamide. But the study says that the main effect was the raising of carbon dioxide and the lowering of lactic acid, because lactic acid is the primary trigger of anxiety, one of the primary triggers. Cortisol is another one, and serotonin is the third one, right? But if you lower lactic acid and simultaneously improve the production of energy in the brain, which is what an niacinamide will do by raising the NAD to the NADH ratio, I think you may have like a clear winner there, and she may not even need to try the hormones like progesterone, which, by the way, I think it's a relatively safe option, especially considering that it's a girl. But I would try the niacinamide first. I think it's no-brainer, considering that it works exactly like those drugs without the addiction and with the added benefit of lowering inflammation, improving the energetic status, and in general, just keeping. It actually has an anti-serotonin effect as well at higher dosage, which I think helps because serotonin is also known to be involved in anxiety.
Give us a quick Idealabs update, and then we'll get out of here.
Not much new. Except I found a chemical which was researched extensively in the 60s, and it seems to be relatively easily synthesizable, and it's a very potent serotonin antagonist comparable to LSD. Now, I don't know if I should say that it's comparable to LSD, but that's what the study did. And I can give the name on the show because it's not a controlled chemical, and if people manage to find it themselves, all power to those people. You can try it out. I've already tried it. It has a remarkably strong anti-serotonin effect. The name of the chemical is 10-methoxyharmalan. So if you type it in Google, maybe you can do that so that you can see it. The paper will come up, which basically describes the potent anti-serotonin effects. And unlike LSD, it's non-hallucinogenic. So I'm thinking of releasing that as a separate product. And that may actually happen before we manage to release the fatty acid oxidation inhibitor, which, by the way, is still in testing. And unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, it's getting delayed because the chemical is already synthesized. But before we release it, I want to do extensive chronic toxicity studies. The acute ones already demonstrated that it's even less toxic than meldonium. But you have to do both acute and chronic toxicity. And for a chronic toxicity, you need at least a month of administration of a relatively high dosage. And right now, I'm trying to do this in either Bulgaria or Taiwan. The Taiwanese lab has shut down for some reason. They refused to do this test, and Bulgaria is under lockdown. So until they reopen, it's difficult to do chronic toxicity. The acute toxicity is already done. Like I said, less toxic than meldonium, but I cannot release it until we get some information on chronic toxicity as well. And I asked Ray about a year ago, just as I started synthesizing it, and he had very similar advice. He said that the molecule looks fine. He doesn't expect it to be toxic, but he wants to see some rodent studies on chronic toxicity. So I will heed his word and play it safe. So the first product that you'll probably see in the next couple of months will be that serotonin antagonist.
Let's talk about it more next week because we're back. Okay, so let me just thank these sticker people. Fob for some, won't even say the amounts because I don't even. It's 10 euros maybe. Fob, thank you so much. Michael for $50. Holy smokes! Thank you so much, Michael. Sincerely appreciate that. Thank you. KT for $9.99. Sincerely appreciate that. Thank you, KT. Linda Bell for $5. Thank you, Linda. Sincerely appreciate it. Michelle for $10. Thank you, Michelle. Marcelo for $20. Thank you, Marcelo. Sincerely appreciate it. Kana with 1,220 yen. Thank you, Kana. You guys are amazing. Sincerely appreciate that. Really does help, So thank you. Let me just run through these last things. Okay, to do the Tocovit Idealabs giveaway, go to bitshoot.com/DannyRoddy. Leave a comment on this episode. I will upload it very soon. I'll do the timestamps. I'll stay up and I'll do the timestamps. And then you can comment on this episode on BitChute, and you can be entered in the Tocovit giveaway. And then DANIMATIV is the winner for this week. And thank you for that. Georgie.
And I wanted to throw in something in there. I know we said no international participants.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
I'm willing to do, no. Actually, I'm willing now to do the international participants as long as you're okay with us sending it with the regular mail, which may get a little bit delayed, but so far we haven't had lost packages. Okay. So if you're okay with that, no need to pay for the shipping.
Okay, I totally forgot.
Only if you want express shipping like DHL or something like that.
Okay, thank you for saying that. Okay, parting words. What do you think?
I think it started dark, became less dark as we go along. So, I mean, I don't think any entity fully controls the world or any specific situation. And we have plenty of evidence that the powers that be are not particularly bright. They're dropping like flies left and right, even with the best medical care, as Ray keeps saying. I don't know. This transhumanism is not going to work. It may destroy a good portion of the earth and its population with it, but there is no way this can work. It's just not biochemically, biologically, and even if you want, spiritually and religiously possible. Ray Kurzweil's predictions, I don't know how many of your listeners know about him. He is this transhumanist. He's the mouthpiece of the transhumanists. He wrote this book, I think it's called The Singularity. Must have been like at least 10 years ago, if not more. There was a recent expose in the Wired magazine about his book, and they concluded that it was a complete bust. Nothing in those predictions came even close. And his big bet was on artificial intelligence. And now they're actually already starting to talk about a new AI winter. And that is a term that's used in computer science because there were very high hopes for artificial intelligence back in the 50s and 60s. Then it turned out that it's really not all that it's cranked out to be. And then there was an AI winter, no funding, no developments, right? And now I think basically that's actually the plan of the powers that be, like to let the public forget about how bad an idea is, and every few decades reintroduce it in new clothes, and then get the public to pay for it, and then again fail miserably, and then retreat, and then wait a few decades and so on. So nothing's going to come out of artificial intelligence. It is impossible. In order for intelligence and consciousness cannot be separated from each other. So you cannot have an fully intelligent machine without that machine also being conscious. That idea that you can manipulate empty, abstract informational patterns and somehow derive new knowledge has already been proven to be mathematically impossible. The only thing that can come out of this is, unfortunately, some suffering for a lot of innocent people. But at least in the end, that this cannot work out, which to me would have been really scary if this was actually a viable idea. Because then I think the powers that be would have been actually even more aggressive into pushing it. And now they're seeing that, hey, we've spent the last 100 years trying to live forever. And guess what? The maximum life expectancy has not moved up an inch, even for the richest and most powerful. So that to me is actually very good news.
Straight from the source. Thank you, Georgi Dinkov. Friday, January 15th, 6 p.m. PST. And then the Friday after that, Raymond Pete. Thank you, Georgi. You make these shows special. Appreciate you. You're the best partner on the planet. Thank you to the audience. We have a small but very active audience. Very fortunate to have people that watch our show. That's what makes these so fun. So thank you guys so much for making that possible. Thank you for the sticker donations. That also helps a lot. Thank you so much. Again, Georgi, thank you. I'll see you next week. And thanks, everybody. Yep. Take care.
Stay sane.